Welcome to another edition of How to Fix It Yourself with Dave and Dave. Today we're going to be working on the 2001 Pathfinder that we've used in the past. Today's episode is about replacing the spark plugs. So we'll go through how to take the engine down to the point where you can actually get at the spark plugs and replacing the spark plugs. And putting it back together is just kind of the reverse. If there's any particular items that need additional attention, we'll highlight those on the putting it back together again. So the spark plugs we're using are the NGK. I happen to actually buy these from Nissan, but you can just go down to your local parts store and get them. These are platinum tipped, so you want to be very careful as you try and check the gap on them. Make sure that you don't damage the tip. They're very sensitive. I do like the iridium a little better, but these are awfully good spark plugs, and the platinum works just fine. You can get a good 60 to 80,000 miles off a nice set of platinum plugs. So one of the first things you want to do is you want to take a look at the spark plug and make sure that that the gapping is correct. Now you'll find that in the owner's manual. If you no longer have an owner's manual, you can look it up online. This particular one is a 0.43 on the inch scale, and if you're looking at the metric scale, it's a 1.1. This one actually has a 4.4 and a 1.11. So what we want to do is just take a look and make sure that it almost goes through but doesn't quite go through on that 4.4 scale. And as I put it in there, sure enough, it's almost going through but not quite. We go down the next lower level and it goes right through. So these are pre-gapped. Most spark plugs you buy today are all pre-gapped, but you want to check to make sure. So it's easy to damage the tip, and it's critical that that tip remain pristine in the engine. So that's the first thing you want to do. So after you do that and you're sure, and you only need to look at one or two of the spark plugs to make sure they're okay, but go ahead and look at all of them if you wish, but I'm just going to look at, I've already looked at a couple of them, just wanted to show that to you. So now we'll get started on pulling the parts off that need to come off to get at the spark plugs. So the first thing we need to do is pull off the shroud. There's three 10 millimeter bolts that need to come off. I've already pulled those off, so we can just lift the shroud off, and that'll give you a good look at the engine. So from there, we're just going to start getting things apart. So one of the things we need to get out of the way is the accelerator cables here. This one here goes to the cruise control. This one here goes to the pedal inside the cabin. So we want to get the cables out of the way, and because we need to take the throttle body off. So if you just rotate that up with your hand, you can get in there and take the just slide the cable out of the slot, and that'll free up that cable. Do the same thing for the the other accelerator cable. Come on out of there. Okay, and then you can take and loosen these front bolts here, and that'll take those off and get those out of the way. So you want to get the mass flow sensor pulled. So you need to get the clip pushed back in to get that to come out. So that gets put down and out of the way. Then the next thing you need to do is this tube here comes off as part of this whole assembly, but you've got to get this one out of the way. So with these smaller ones, you can use just a pair of needle nose pliers to get on there and pull that back. And that'll come out of the way. Again, you don't need to take this off. This will all come off as part of the assembly when we take that off. I've already loosened this hose clamp here. So this hose clamp here is loose. It's not quite ready to come off yet, but it is loose. I've also loosened this hose clamp here. So that one's loose and ready to come off. There is a hose back here that we need to take loose. And for that particular one, we will do a shot of that because I'll show you how to use an actual hose clamp tool. These are very handy, especially when you put the hose clamp back on, because it will lock in place. So you'll notice that as you go down and clamp it, it latches, and that'll hold it so as you can move it back, and then later on you can clamp it, and then you can use it easily to put it back on again. So we'll do that on those back hoses because those are larger hose clamps. All right, so now you can see that the hose clamp's off, and that's a little bit of a stiff hose, so we'll have to kind of jimmy it off of there. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is one of the spark plugs. So this is what we're looking for, these flat white tops. They're held in by one 10mm screw. And so once we get the throttle body out, you can see where that we get at all the other three spark plugs, or all three spark plugs. This back one's a little difficult just because you've got a lot of wires and stuff you need to work around to get to it. We still have this hose to pull off yet, but when they come out, they'll have a stem. The top here is actually a high voltage coil. And so they use a low voltage input to the high voltage coil, and that's what fires your spark plug. So it'll have a stem to it, and then down fairly deep in there will be the spark plug itself. So we'll pull the hose and pull the throttle body, and then we should be ready to pull the spark plugs on this side. So these take a hex driver, and it's a 6mm hex driver. So we'll go ahead and get the 6mm in there and loosen them up, and then you can go ahead and take them all out. Once you kind of get them loose, they'll come out, they'll be finger loose so you can get them off. So then go ahead and finish taking off your bolts, and then you can remove the throttle body. Like I said, while it's out, we'll take this over to the side of the house, and we'll get some throttle body cleaner on it and kind of get it cleaned out, because it's showing a fair amount of dirt, as you saw earlier. And by the way, just a note, we did pre-loosen these so that it wouldn't be so awkward on camera, but they should be very, very tight. There is a torque spec on these that you should follow. All right. So we'll go ahead and take that off, and we'll be back to you after we get that off. So the first thing we want to do is we need to get this 10mm bolt off of here so we can pull these out of the way to get at this particular spark plug right there. So we've got it loose now. We'll go ahead and pull it out. Okay, so that gets those out of the way. So now we can get at the harness here. Slide that off. And then we take out the 10mm bolt there. And then just gently start wiggling and lifting. You don't want to pull hard. You want to let it come on up. And that's the spark plug attachment there. So that's the electrical connection down into the spark plug. As I said, it's quite deep down in there. And we'll go ahead and clean out the surfaces on this. We'll get some lube on it and clean out the block a little bit so as it all goes back together nicely. So you'll want to use a actual spark plug wrench. If you can see down inside, it's got a little rubber boot in there, and that'll keep you from cracking the top of the spark plug. Now when you're taking it out, not quite as important, but when you're putting the new ones in, you want to be sure you get that, have it on that boot. Now these particular spark plugs, as you saw when we looked at them earlier, have a really long thread. So this is going to take a little bit of time to get it all the way out and loose. All right, starting to feel loose now. Yep, not quite as loose as I thought. All right, so there comes out the spark plug. And if you can kind of zoom in on that spark plug, you notice that this is actually in pretty good shape. I think it's got about 60,000 miles on it. The spark plugs are supposed to go between 60 and 100, depending upon what the dealer versus the owner's manual says, but we're going to go ahead and replace it. The tip of the iridium is worn down a bit, but the color of the spark plug being brown like that and not oily is a good sign that things are running well, at least in this cylinder of the engine. All right, so you've kind of got to see how it comes apart. We'll go ahead and put one spark plug in, and then we'll go ahead and do the rest of this bank. We'll show you a couple of tricks on the other bank for getting access to the spark plugs, and then we'll go ahead and do those. Where we did the throttle body cleaning already, we'll go ahead and wipe down the inside of the intake manifold as best as we can, just to kind of clean things out, as long as we have access to it. We're not going to try and do a real detailed clean or anything like that, just kind of wipe things down and get the grease and oil and dirt that's built up on there out of there. So just a few wrap-up notes. One is, you're very likely, especially on older cars, to run into a spark plug that's stuck. I mean, it just seems like you're not going to get it to move at all. Be careful about trying to over torque or over push to get that out of there, because you really don't want to tear up your aluminum head. And if you push real hard, remember that the threads on the spark plugs are steel. Even though they may be a coated steel, they're still a steel. And that against a aluminum head, your aluminum's going to give before your steel threads do. So what you want to do is you want to go very, very slowly. Just recognize you're going to be hours at this, and just take the time and just put it in your head, okay, this is going to be time consuming. So you want to just move it a little bit at a time, as much as it'll give, with a good push, but don't be getting a big pry bar out there and just jam it out of there. You'll take out the head. So just take it when it can, pull it back a little bit, then let it sit, to let everything kind of recoalesce to where it was, because it's all garbaged up, probably with a lot of crud from the gasoline, so it'll be a lot of carbon scarring up in there. And just keep working it just a little bit at a time, maybe a couple inches on your wrench at a time, and then back it off, let it sit, do it again, and just slowly work it out. Now you can also try to use some penetrating oil down there. Again, if you do that, you'll want to let it set for a while, because it takes a while for the penetrating oil to get down in there. It may or may not help. It depends on how long your threads are as to whether that'll work. But again, just recognize that it's just one of those things that's going to take some time, and if you get too anxious and start doing too much pressure on it, it's just going to take out your head. And that's a lot worse than spending a few hours trying to get the spark plug out of there. If you do use penetrating oil, recognize that it's going to go down into your cylinder. When you first start up your car, you're going to get all kinds of smoke out the tailpipe from burning that penetrating oil. Your O2 sensors aren't going to like it. Most likely they'll be fine and survive, but just be aware that it may take out an O2 sensor. Again, replacing an O2 sensor and being hours at taking out a spark plug is a lot cheaper than having to pull the head and either replace the head or do an all thread on the head or do some other item to try and refurbish that head. All right, now when we're putting in new spark plugs, I always recommend using anti-seize, but be careful which anti-seize you get. You want the copper anti-seize so that it has good electrical conductivity. The copper is also a much higher temperature rating. It's way higher than what the engine should ever get to, but go ahead and use that. You don't need a lot. Just kind of get it on a little bit of the lower threads. It'll go up onto the top threads. Be sure you don't get any on the tip. You want to make sure you keep it well back from being on the tip. You don't need to have it down quite that far to where you're going to risk getting it on the tip. Now that we have the anti-seize on there, if you have a little excess, go ahead and just wipe it off again. Make sure you keep away from the tip. So now we'll go ahead and put this back into our socket, and we'll drop it down in, again being careful not to bang it against the side to mess up the adjustment on it. And go ahead and start turning it in. And it's got a long thread, so just be patient. Okay, now you notice it just kind of tightened up on me and I didn't push it. So basically what you want to do is get this down to where you just feel it hit on the edge. Now it has a compression gasket on it, a metal compression gasket. And so now you want to take and turn it about a half a turn to compress that gasket and to seal up the spark plug. You'll notice after I get about a half a turn on there, it really gets tight. And so now we've got it seated properly. Your spark plug, the box, the little tiny box the spark plug comes in, should have indications on it of how you tighten these up. The one that we have from NGK or Nissan says about a half a turn after you get it what they call finger tight, or where it just seats up. So we've got that in there. Now get our socket out. Make sure you still have your rubber piece in there. You don't want to leave the rubber piece in the on the spark plug, because that'll make it very difficult to get the electrical connection back on. Now you'll notice that when we put this spark plug in, I mentioned here just a few minutes ago that we did it by taking it down to where it's snug, and then we did it by a half turn to 2/3 of a turn, which is what it says on the box that the spark plug comes in. And if your spark plug does that, then that's good. Don't worry about it, even if you put anti-seize on the threads like we showed you how. That's fine. But if your specification is a torque spec, so many inch-pounds of pressure to put the spark plugs in, recognize that with anti-seize on those threads that it changes the torque spec, and you've got to back that torque spec off. So if it's, just as an example, if it's a 45 inch-pound torque spec without the anti-seize, when you put the anti-seize on there, you're going to take it from a 45 down to maybe a 35 or 38. Because those threads are lubed now, it's going to not take it, the torque is going to be different on a lube thread than on a non-lube thread. Now a lot of the spark plug manufacturers will tell you that, oh, we've already did a nickel coat or a coat onto the threads so you don't have to use anti-seize. I have had mixed results with not using anti-seize, so I always use the anti-seize. The copper that we've shown you, there's also a nickel-based one that's very excellent that we'll have down in our in our list of recommended items for you to look at. But just recognize you do have to change that torque spec, because if you leave it at the same and you put anti-seize on there, you're going to over torque that thread in terms of what the aluminum in your head is experiencing. So just be sure you back that off. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and get a little silicone grease on the seal surfaces of the connector. We're also going to spray the electrical parts down with that electrical cleaner that we've talked about in previous episodes. So I'll get those and we'll get a quick spray down and put some silicone on there and we'll be good to go. All right, now we have it ready to go back in. We've got all the prep work done. We've got it sealed in there. We've got the silicone on there. So now just kind of, again, just start working it. Get that out of the way for a minute. Start working that in. Kind of twist and turn as it seats back in. Make sure you get it in good and snug. Give it kind of a good little push once you have it seated. And then you're ready to put the, now you're ready to put the bolt back in. And connect the electrical connector. And all you need to do on that bolt is just make it tight. You don't need to make it, you don't need to over torque it. So just make it snug and tight. So now we're gonna just make sure that that goes on and just get it snug. Don't over tighten it. You're dealing with plastic parts. So just get it good and snug so it stays on there. And you've got one spark plug done. So we'll go ahead and do the other two on this side. Then we'll show you how to open up the other side to be able to get access to those. But we won't show you the actual replacement of those spark plugs because now you've seen how to do it. And then we'll talk a little bit about putting things back together again. For the passenger side or the right side, you need to first take this bracket loose to pull all this stuff back out of the way. So we'll go ahead and get those two bolts out of there. All right, so now you can take and get this stuff out of the way. You might have to pull your dipstick there and set it on the other side, but you can clearly see that you now have access to these two here. So this is one, that's two. Now to get access to that third one, you can get down in here if you like, or you can take and pull these two guys off of here. Now, if you decide to go ahead and take these guys off of there, that's fine. But I would recommend you do it off of the support clips rather than off of than just take the connectors apart. All right, so now that we've got that out of the way, now you can see how you can just lean this back. You'll need to pull your transmission fluid dipstick, and once you move that, then you can slide all of this stuff back out of the way. It's a little tight, but you can get your hands down in there to get all three of those spark plugs. Again, this first one looks different. It has a very different connector than those pancake ones, but it's pretty obvious where they're at. So we'll go ahead and take care of getting all the spark plugs taken care of, and then we'll come back to you when we put the throttle body back on, and from there you guys can pretty well see how to put the rest of the engine back together again and be done with your spark plugs. So We've got the spark plugs replaced. We're now going to put the throttle body back on. So the first thing we need to do is get down in here and get that rear hose put back onto the throttle body. So you kind of have to work around things a little bit. So these are water hoses that help the throttle warm up properly and quickly, and so they're very important. And if you don't put them on, you're going to spray water all over the place. So you want to be sure and get those on. And get the hose clip back up about where it was before. It should seat into the old grooves. Now we're going to go ahead and put the, we'll do the other hose in a minute, but now we're going to go ahead and mount up the throttle body. So get it all positioned. Get one of the screws through whichever slot is convenient for you, and then go ahead and let's see, got to make sure we get that oriented properly. So so this is the way it orients. So go ahead and hang the gasket on that side, hang the gasket on this side, and go ahead and get the bolt started. All right. From there, you pretty well can see how the rest of it goes back together again. It just goes back together in the reverse order. I don't know that we need to go over anything else. I wanted just to show you how to be sure and get that gasket put in properly. We did clean out the throttle body, so it's nice and clean. Don't forget to do the water hose down here and your electrical connections up here. And then you've got this one down here that controls the relay that opens and closes the throttle body. So with that, I think we've pretty well showed the essence of getting the spark plugs replaced on a 2001 Pathfinder. Again, this is a common thing to do, and many engines are built very similar, so you'll run into the same sort of issues. And again, it takes almost more time to take things apart and put all the peripheral stuff together to get at the spark plugs than it does to actually replace the spark plugs. Hope you've had hope this has been informative for you. Please be sure and click the like button, and also be sure to subscribe. And we'll be putting links to the various parts and tools down below. Please buy through our links, as that helps us keep this channel going for you. Thanks very much, and have a good day.